Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
6 months ago, I made the decision to stop paying a single cent to what claims to be my Homeowners Association, and let me tell you, it's been one of the strangest, most surreal experiences I've ever had. Every day feels like stepping into some alternate reality where logic doesn't apply, and the rules are made up as they go along. I'm not exaggerating when I say this situation is wild. It's like something out of a bad TV drama, except it's my actual life. I've spent hours trying to wrap my head around how things got to this point, and honestly, the more I dig, the crazier it gets. I want to walk you through it because this isn't just some minor disagreement, it's a full-blown mess, and it's nowhere near being resolved. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this all unfolds. It all started when I moved into this neighborhood. The realtor was all smiles, handing me a stack of papers about the Homeowners Association. "Just standard stuff," she said, waving her hand like it was no big deal. "Everyone pays their dues and it keeps the community looking nice." I didn't think much of it at the time. I signed the papers, paid the fees, and moved in. Life was good, until it wasn't. Fast forward a few months and I started noticing things. The so-called HOA wasn't doing much. The community pool was always closed, the landscaping was a mess, and the streets were littered with potholes. I thought, what am I even paying for? So I started asking questions. Big mistake. I reached out to the HOA board, hoping for some straightforward answers, but what I got was nothing short of useless. They were about as helpful as a screen door on a submarine, completely ineffective and utterly pointless. Every question I asked was met with evasive responses, half-truths, or outright silence. They'd dodge one inquiry, give a vague non-answer to another, and then act like they'd done their job. It was infuriating. And then, as if that wasn't enough, they had the audacity to send me a late notice when I decided to withhold my dues until they provided some actual clarity. That was the last straw. I wasn't going to play their games anymore. That's when I knew it was time to bring in the big guns, my attorney. If they weren't going to take me seriously, maybe they'd listen to someone who knew how to hold them accountable. My attorney is a no-nonsense kind of guy. He doesn't mess around, and he's not afraid to go toe-to-toe with anyone. He sent a letter to the HOA, demanding answers and documentation. Guess what? They ignored him. Completely. They kept sending me past due notices and late fees, acting like they hadn't even received his letters. It was infuriating. Then things took a turn. My attorney did some digging and discovered something that blew my mind. This HOA, it's not even a real HOA, it's been defunct for decades. They've been operating under fake, doctored restrictions, conspiring with the realtor to collect fees they have no legal right to collect. Can you believe that? Decades of fraud. And no one noticed, or maybe they did, and no one cared enough to do anything about it. When my attorney told me, I was equal parts furious and relieved. Furious because I'd been paying these clowns for years, and relieved because we finally had something concrete to go on. He drafted a 24-count federal complaint, and let me tell you, it's a thing of beauty. Breach of duty, fraud, misrepresentation, negligence, consumer protection violations, FTC matters, the whole 9 yards. These people are about to have a very bad time. We've got one last shot to resolve this without going to court. There's a special meeting coming up, but honestly, I'm not holding my breath. The owners are just as clueless as the board members. There's a reason things have gotten this bad, and it's because no one has ever held them accountable. They've been skating by for years, collecting fees and doing nothing. It's a mess. Just today, I got another notice. Can you believe it? They're still trying to collect even after everything we've uncovered. My attorney says they've ignored all his serious requests, and at this point it's clear they're not going to back down without a fight. Fine by me. I'm ready to take this all the way. Speaking of fights, I've never been much of a gambler, but if I could bet on my HOA losing this case, I'd be all in. I mean, how could they possibly win? They're not even a real HOA. Is there some offshore or Vegas website where I can place that bet? Just kidding, kind of. Anyway, that's where things stand. I'll keep you updated as this mess unfolds. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. It's a doozy. The meeting was set for a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse, a building that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 90s. I walked in with my attorney and the room was already packed. Neighbors I'd never spoken to were sitting in folding chairs whispering to each other. The board members were at the front shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. You could cut the tension with a knife. My attorney leaned over and muttered, "This is going to be interesting." The meeting started with the usual formalities, minutes from the last meeting, treasurer's report, blah blah blah. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood up and every head in the room turned to look at me. I took a deep breath and started. "I've been trying to get answers from this board for months," I began, my voice steady. "I've asked for documentation, for transparency, for accountability. And what have I gotten in return? Late notices, ignored letters, and a whole lot of excuses." I could see the board members squirming in their seats. One of them, a woman with a tight bun and a pinched face, tried to interrupt. "If you just paid your dues?" "No," I said, cutting her off. "This isn't about dues. This is about the fact that this HOA isn't even a real HOA. It's been defunct for decades, and you've been collecting fees under false pretenses. That's fraud." The room erupted. People were shouting, some in support, some in disbelief. My attorney stepped forward, holding up a hand to quiet the crowd. "We have the documentation to prove it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And if this isn't resolved, we'll be filing a federal lawsuit." The board members looked like they'd seen a ghost. The woman with the bun opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, the president of the board, a man with a receding hairline and a nervous twitch, stood up. "We'll need to review this information," he said, his voice shaking. "We'll get back to you. You've had months to review it," I shot back. "We're done waiting." The meeting ended in chaos, with people shouting questions and the board members scrambling to leave. As I walked out, a neighbor I'd never met before stopped me. "Thank you," she said, her eyes wide. "I've been wondering where my money was going for years." I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd been taken advantage of. And I wasn't going to stop until we got justice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My attorney filed the federal complaint, and the HOA finally stopped sending me notices. But they didn't stop trying to defend themselves. They hired their own attorney, a slick guy in a suit who tried to downplay everything. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said during a phone call with my attorney. "We're willing to work something out." "Work something out," I repeated when my attorney told me. "They've been committing fraud for decades. There's no working something out," my attorney agreed. "We're not settling," he said. "This goes to court, and that's where we are now, waiting for a court date, waiting for justice. It's been a long, frustrating road, but I'm not backing down. These people thought they could get away with it, but they picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. Stay tuned. This story is far from over." This whole post bounces around like a pachinko machine, with no context and no point. Is HO a fraud, even if true, even a level complaint? Seems like it would be at least limited to state, if not county jurisdiction. I feel like either OP or OP's attorney is pretty clueless. Seriously, another whiny homeowner complaining about their HOA. Get over yourself, dude. You signed the contract when you bought the house. If you didn't like the rules, you shouldn't have moved there. And now you're not paying your dues for 6 months? That's just being a deadbeat. You're probably the kind of neighbor who lets their lawn grow 3 feet tall and parks broken down cars in the driveway. The HOA is there to protect property values and keep the neighborhood looking nice. Stop trying to play detective and pay your damn dues like everyone else. Your lawyer is probably some ambulance chaser who's just taking your money, and all this talk about a federal lawsuit and 24 counts sounds like complete BS. You're not some hero exposing corruption. You're just a troublemaker who doesn't want to follow the rules. Grow up and start being a responsible homeowner instead of wasting everyone's time with your conspiracy theories. I find it hard to believe that someone could uncover such a massive fraud all by themselves. The author seems to think they're some kind of genius detective, but I doubt they have the skills or resources to actually investigate something like this. And if it were true, wouldn't there be news articles about it? Seems suspicious that they're the only one talking about this huge scandal. Also, the way they describe their lawyer makes me skeptical. No respectable attorney would show a client a draft of a federal complaint and brag about That's not how real lawyers talk or behave. The whole story reeks of someone with a grudge against their HOA who's spinning wild tales to justify not paying their dues. I bet if we heard the HOA's side of the story, it would be completely different. The author comes across as arrogant and delusional, thinking they're some kind of hero when they're probably just causing problems for their neighbors. My advice: stop wasting time on internet fantasies and start being a responsible member of your community. Or move somewhere without an HOA if you can't handle following rules.
If you like our stories, then please like and subscribe and comment, and remember to hit that bell icon so you never miss out. We have new stories almost every day.
Malicious compliance with the HOA. I've been living in this neighborhood for years now, and our Homeowners Association has always been a bit of a joke. Don't get me wrong, They're not terrible or anything, just inefficient. For the most part, they've left me alone, and the dues aren't too outrageous, so we've coexisted peacefully. That is, until 2 days ago when everything went sideways. Let me paint you a picture of how things usually work around here. In all the time I've been a part of this HOA, I think I've received maybe one actual invoice for our yearly dues. But I'm a responsible homeowner, you know. I know when they're due and how much I owe, so I've always made it a point to pay at the beginning of the year. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure of the exact due date, but I've always paid in January or February without any issues. This year was no different. I sent in my payment about a week ago, feeling pretty good about staying on top of things. So imagine my surprise when I received a notice yesterday, threatening to file a lien on my property. I was baffled. I had paid, hadn't I? Something wasn't adding up. Confused and a little annoyed, I fired off an email to the HOA. Their response: they claimed they didn't have my updated contact information, which they had apparently just received. Now here's where things start to get a little messy. About a month before they were set to send out invoices, the HOA had requested new contact information from all homeowners. Something about a law change in Colorado. Being the diligent resident that I am, I promptly responded with my updated info, but then, in a move that can only be described as peak incompetence, they sent out the invoices before processing the new information. Over the next few email exchanges, the HOA secretary proceeded to tell me every which way I was wrong. According to her, I was 34 days late with my payment based on her not receiving it. So she had sent the notice again, even though I had already paid. She insisted she had done nothing wrong, completely ignoring the fact that she had sent the invoice 15 days late to an incorrect address. I tried to explain the situation calmly. Look, I wrote, I sent in the updated contact information as requested. I paid my dues on time. The problem here seems to be on your end. But it was like talking to a brick wall. No matter how many times I explained the situation, no matter how clearly I laid out the facts, the secretary refused to budge. She was dug in, convinced she was completely in the right. In her mind, she was infallible. And I was just another troublesome homeowner trying to weasel my way out of paying what I owed. She dismissed every point I made, ignored every piece of evidence I provided, and responded with the same robotic, bureaucratic tone, as if reading from a script. It didn't matter that I had proof of payment, or that I'd updated my contact information on time. To her, the problem was mine and mine alone. Her tone was maddening, her logic circular, and her refusal to take even an ounce of responsibility was beyond frustrating. It was clear she wasn't interested in resolving the issue. She just wanted to shut me down. To add insult to injury, since my email address had changed, they cut off my access to the HOA website where I had previously made my payments. Now I was going to have to rely on them physically mailing me a bill. Fine, I thought. If that's how they want to play it, I can play that game too. What the HOA didn't realize, and what I hadn't disclosed before, is that I don't actually live in the United States. I own the property, sure, but I'm currently residing overseas. So I decided to update my contact information for a third time. This time, I gave them my actual mailing address and removed my email address entirely. From now on, any correspondence would have to happen via regular mail. Here's the twist. Sending mail to where I live now isn't cheap or fast. It costs around $70 just to get a letter to me, and it can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months to arrive. So you can be absolutely sure that next year I won't be paying a single cent until that invoice is physically in my hands. Not 1 day sooner. Let's see how they handle that. As I sat back, feeling a mix of frustration and satisfaction, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. I decided to do a little digging into Colorado law, just to make sure I was on solid ground. Lo and behold, I found something interesting. According to Colorado Revised Statutes Section 38-33.3-3168, 2024, the association is required to furnish a written statement of unpaid assessments to a unit owner upon written request. They have 14 calendar days to provide this statement after receiving the request. If they fail to do so, they lose the right to assert a lien on the property for unpaid assessments that were due as of the date of the request. Armed with this knowledge, I felt even more confident in my position. All I'm asking for is a proper invoice of what I owe. Once I receive that, I'm more than happy to pay. Until then, they can't touch my property with their threats of liens. As I closed my laptop, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was frustrated by the unnecessary drama and the HOA's incompetence. On the other hand, I felt a certain satisfaction in knowing that I had found a way to work within their system, while also making things considerably more difficult for them. The next day, I received another email from the HOA secretary. Apparently, she had finally processed my payment and realized her mistake. Her tone was noticeably less combative this time. "Mr." the email began, "I apologize for the confusion regarding your dues. We have received your payment and updated our records accordingly. The notice of intent to file a lien has been rescinded." I read the email twice, savoring each word. It wasn't quite the groveling apology I might have hoped for, but it was something. Still, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a long and potentially frustrating relationship with the HOA. Over the next few days, I found myself constantly checking my mailbox, half expecting to find some new notice or demand from the HOA, but nothing came. The silence was almost eerie after the flurry of communications we'd had. I started talking to some of my neighbors about the situation. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had run into issues with the HOA's new system. "Oh yeah," my next-door neighbor Tom said when I brought it up. "They sent my invoice to my old address from 5 years ago. I only found out about it when they threatened to fine me for late payment." Another neighbor, Tricia, had a similar story. "They mixed up my email address with someone else's," she told me. "I was getting invoices for a property I don't even own." It seemed like the HOA's incompetence was reaching new heights. Part of me wondered if it might be time to rally the other homeowners and push for some changes in how the association was run. But another part of me knew that would likely be an uphill battle, fraught with bureaucracy and resistance. For now, I decided to bide my time. I'd keep meticulous records of all my communications with the HOA, pay my dues on time once I received the proper invoice, and wait to see how things unfolded. As I sit here now looking out at the neighborhood I call home, even if from afar, I can't help but shake my head at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought that something as simple as paying HOA dues could turn into such a convoluted ordeal? But hey, that's life in an HOA-controlled community, I suppose. You take the good with the bad, the efficient with the incompetent, and sometimes, when pushed, you find creative ways to comply with the rules while also making a point. I know this isn't the end of my HOA saga. There will likely be more misunderstandings, more poorly addressed envelopes, more threats of liens and fines. But I'll be ready for them. And who knows, maybe my little act of malicious compliance will spark some much-needed changes in how things are run around here. In the meantime, I'll be here watching my mailbox, waiting for that next invoice to make its slow, expensive journey across the ocean. And when it arrives, you can bet I'll pay it promptly, but not a moment before. It's possible your HOA documents specify that them sending a letter via USPS is deemed sufficient to notify you, whether or not it arrives. Likewise, it would be unusual for an invoice to be due whenever you happen to receive it, no matter how long that takes. Or there would be services that hang on to your mail for a few months so you don't have to pay your bills promptly. In which case, living in a place with a broken postal system would be a you problem, as they'd be properly notifying you of important legal stuff, and you won't know about it. Seems like a good way to get fines, a default judgment, or a lien on your property. You might want to rethink the whole "ha-ha, you have no reasonable way to contact me" approach, and give them a valid email. Colorado law requires registered mail with return receipt. International return confirmation on an item requires paying for the international confirmation, $6.25. Registered mail requires waived fee, starting at $21.75 for a postcard. The HOA must have confirmation of delivery, so when the pink PS 2865 form that is attached to the registered item is delivered, the postal carrier fills it out and mailed it back to the U.S. When that makes it back to the H, can they claim proper notice had been given for the invoice in order for it to be valid? So, $28 plus a lot of time, because Ecuador mail service is not reliable. The HOA may need to send it multiple times before it is correctly delivered and the return confirmation correctly posted back to the U.S.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.